Senate will come to order on this Wednesday, March 10th. Roll call, please.
Roll call for day 17, Wednesday, March 10th. Anderson.
Here.
Baldwin.
Here.
Beitman.
Here.
Boner.
Here.
Bouchard.
Here.
Case.
Present.
Cooper.
Here.
Driscoll.
Here.
Ellis. French.
Here.
Murphy. Guru.
Here.
Hicks.
Here.
Hutchings.
Here.
James.
Here.
Kinsky.
Here.
Cole.
Here.
Cost.
Here.
Landon. McEwen.
Here.
Nethercott. Pappas.
Here.
Perkins.
Here.
Rothfuss.
Here.
Salazar. Schuler. Scott.
Here.
Steinmetz. Wasserberger.
Here.
Salazar.
Here.
President Dockstader.
Here.
30 present.
Thank you. Prayer by Father Crunkleton.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, today we are halfway through this week and midway through the session. Give us renewed energy and focus so that as we move through today and the remaining days of the session, that we may have the determination and drive to complete all the business and tasks that yet have to be addressed. Give us your guidance as we take up the budget on second reading, the other bills coming before us on second and third reading, and the bills yet to be considered on general file. Guide our discussions and debate, grace us with useful amendments, and give us wisdom and good judgment when we vote. And when this day is done, give us the satisfaction that what we were able to achieve and a good night's rest to be able to complete the rest of the week and the session. We ask this through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Father, Senator Nethercott, would you lead us in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading correction, approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the Journal of March 9, 2021 has been read and recommends it be approved. Senator Kolb, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. Under new business, we are continuing to work with the University of Wyoming Family Practice. If you need any assistance, we have the number up here. Again, appreciating Father Thomas Crunkleton Jr. of Holy Trinity Catholic Church for helping us with the prayer. Today in Wyoming history, Union Pacific shareholders resolved to erect Ames Monument between Laramie and Cheyenne in honor of Oakes Ames and Oliver Ames Jr., two Union Pacific financiers. Quote for the day, "We must consult our means rather than our wishes." George Washington. Session status, we are budget week, committee of the whole second reading. Reminder also that those of you who have not had your photo taken, you have until 2 p.m. in the Capitol Extension there to get that photo taken. House bills on first reading. House Bill 52, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 52 engrossed Wyoming School Protein Enhancement Project, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. Passed the House, ayes 60.
House Bill 52, assigned to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. House Bill 54, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 54 engrossed Wyoming Meatpacking Initiative, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. Passed the House, ayes 47, noes 12, excused 1.
House Bill 54 is assigned to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. House Bill 58, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 58 engrossed, State Parks Account Expenditure Authority, sponsored by the Travel Committee. Passed the House, ayes 44, noes 15, excused 1.
House Bill 58 is assigned to committee number 6, Travel Rec Wildlife. House Bill 86, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 86 engrossed, Off-Road Recreational Vehicles Registration Authorized, sponsored by Representative Newsom. Passed the House, ayes 60.
House Bill 86 is assigned to committee number 6, TRW, Travel Rec Wildlife. House Bill 95, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 95 engrossed, Game Roadkill, sponsored by Representative Swanitzer. Passed the House, ayes 35, noes 24, excused 1.
House Bill 95 is referred to committee number 6, Travel Rec Wildlife. House Bill 101, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 101 engrossed, Elk Feed Ground Closing Requirements, sponsored by Representative Summers. Passed the House, ayes 58, noes 2.
House Bill 101 is assigned to committee number 6, Travel Rec Wildlife. House Bill 118, first reading of the bill.
House Bill 118 engrossed, Food Freedom Act Amendments. Passed the House, ayes 55, noes 5.
House Bill 118 is assigned to committee number 5, Agriculture. House Joint Resolution 3, first reading of the resolution.
House Joint Resolution 3 engrossed, State Lands Mineral Royalties Constitutional Amendment, sponsored by Representative Hallinan. Passed the House, ayes 40, noes 20.
House Joint Resolution 3 is assigned to committee number 3, Revenue. Reports from standing committees.
March 9, 2021. Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom is referred Senate File 38, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 126, Real Estate Subdivisions, Easement Requirements, respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Driscoll, Nethercott, and Scott. Senator Driscoll, Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 104, Anesthesiologist Assistance, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it return without recommendation. Ayes, Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 3, Revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 92, Public Hospitals Out of County Operations, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Case, James, Pappas, and Schuler. Senator Baldwin, Acting Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 136, Required Public Service Commission Considerations, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 118, Federal Emergency COVID-19 Relief Funding, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Guru, Hicks, Kinsky, Perkins, and Steinmetz. Senator Perkins, Chairman. March 9, 2021, Mr. President, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands, and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 135, Water Rights, Livestock on Federal Land, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Bouchard, French, Cost, and Wasserberger. Senator Bourne, Chairman.
Bills on second reading. Senate File 36, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 36, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 62, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 62 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, the bill is so ordered. Senate File 96, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 96 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 101, second reading of the Senate file. There is an amendment. Reading clerk.
One moment, please. Senate File 101, second reading amendment number 1, page 2, line 3, after.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I'm sorting through my pile of amendments here. See if I can find it.
Someone pass one over to him if you could, please. There we go.
All right. Mr.
Sen-
President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 101. Members of the body, we had quite a robust discussion yesterday. And I think the part that I think was substantive in that discussion is bringing in those lower level of crimes that are below a felony that now could be, you could have your cell phone pinged and use that for tracing for something less than a felony. And so all the amendment does is go in there, and particularly when it comes to property. So it goes in there, if you go to page 2, line 3, that's part of it. It gets rid of the language that says or threatens, and then goes down to page 2, line 4, and says eliminates property out of that definition of a crime of violence. So right now, it'll still leave in means an offense that has an element and attempts to use physical force against a person. So it takes the property crime out of here and it takes the threat out of here. Mr. Chairman, stand for any questions.
Questions or discussion on the amendment? Senator Nethercon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good little amendment.
Senator Perkins.
I'm very sympathetic, and I think it's a really good step in the right direction. But my concern is, I mean, quite frankly, particularly with, you can have organized crime, you can have all kinds of RICO, illegal acts that don't really have anything to do with violent crime, but they have to do with broad-based property crime. And so, I mean, I'm all for. I don't think, I think that gets what I'm just. So my question is, does that limit the ability? Does that take this investigative tool away from when you have significant organized crime, or you've got significant, if you look at, I guess the drugs are already, illicit drugs are already covered, but you've got other things that go in there aren't necessarily violent crimes that are property crimes, but they are far reaching. And I mean, they consist of criminal enterprises in some instances. And would this prohibit the use of that in those situations? And so we might pass it, but I don't think we're there yet, but we're maybe getting closer.
Senator Scott.
Mr. President, I tread in this area with some trepidation. I'm not an expert on criminal law, but it does seem to me that there's an aspect, we've been focusing on this where the government is trying to convict an individual who is the owner of the phone, that of doing some kind of nefarious criminal activity. My question is, what about the circumstance where the person whose phone line it is wants the tap because they are being abused and they'd like to find out where the calls are coming from, whether it would be a blackmail situation, which could involve violence, but might not, might just be a threat to reputation, or where somebody was trying to
perpetrate a fraud and the potential victim was cooperating with the police, having spotted it as such and saying, let's get rid of this kind of stuff. And I don't know how that plays into this circumstance, because I can see how this device could be used to find who the perpetrator was, where you had cooperation. And I'm afraid this amendment, Mr. President, might preclude that use of this particular tool. So I think I'm against this amendment. And there's probably, if we want to use it the way I think we could, there may be some other amendments. And frankly, they're beyond my ability and the time available to deal with.
Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and for the amendment, but ironically, I think I share the view that it doesn't go far enough, but in the other direction, ironically, of the debate we've just had. So I'll rise to explain that a little bit. This amendment helps, in my opinion, to clarify that a violent crime then becomes a violent crime. But I would just remind the body to look at the language of how it's used. So for example, on page 2, the clause in which that definition is employed is that the circumstances under which you could use this approach would be when relevant to assist in the apprehension of a person for whom there is probable cause for that person's arrest for a felony or a crime of violence. So we've got an or clause here, which means it could be any felony whatsoever. Remember that felony we passed years ago where if you shoot like 3 deer in the same day or something like that, that's a felony. That would be a felony that this could be utilized for. And then at the same time, I'm a little curious, and I'd ask the sponsor, I don't think it even has to be used on the person that is the suspect. The way this is structured, it seems to imply that it could be used on anyone as long as it helped to assist in the apprehension. But I'm struggling through the language to see whether that's accurate or not, because it's for that person's arrest. But that person is the one for whom there's probable cause. And maybe that's things that go up in the night. So I'd ask for clarification if I'm missing or correctly reading that language. But either way, any type of felony would still apply. So this amendment honestly doesn't effectuate any change, I don't think. But at least it makes that definition a little tighter. So I'm going to be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further discussion? On the amendment, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Amendment has passed. We're back on the bill. Senate File 101, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 102, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 102, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Senate File 106, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 106, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 110, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 110, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 117, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 117, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a 3rd time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 157, second reading of the Senate file. There are 2 amendments. Oh, Mr. Senator Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask at this time that we lay this bill back one day. I'm working on an amendment, second amendment. I have one, but I'm working on another. And I'm sorry, but I've been tied up on other matters. So I'd like to request we lay back one day.
Okay, barring objection, we are laying back Senate File 157. Senator Driscoll.
President, just to note, we're going to move the order of business today for the second reading of the budget bill will come after third reading without objection.
Okay. Objection, we'll move forward then. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
I move the third reading consent list, which is as follows. Senate File 002, School Facilities Project Prioritization. Senate File 0074, Athletic Trainer Reversions. Senate File 0093, Witchy Repayment Program, Veterinary Medicine Students. Senate File 108, Career and Technical Education Terminology. Senate File 109, Board of Dental Examiners Amendments. Senate File 115, Education, Pupil Teacher Contact Time. Senate File 119, Investment of State Permanent Funds. Senate File 120, Investment of State Non-Permanent Funds. Senate File 130, Charter Schools. Senate File 155, Limiting Firearm Seizure and Regulation During Emergencies.
Would anyone like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that Senate File 155 be removed from the consent list. There is an amendment on that bill. If we can have it laid back.
It's now off the list. Okay. Clarification, Senator Nethercott, would you move to lay it back into the regular third readings?
Mr. President, yes.
That's a good request.
Thank you.
Thank you. So requested. It's been approved. All right, let's go back to our consent list. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 2, Senate File 74, Senate File 93, Senate File 108, Senate File 109, Senate File 115, Senate File 119, Senate File 120, and Senate File 130. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call on third reading consent list. Anderson. Baldwin. Beitman. Boner. Bouchard. Case. Cooper. Driscoll. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. James. Kinsky. Cole. Cost. Landon. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Perkins. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. Wasserberger. President Dockstader. On the consent list, 30 aye. Senate File 2, are there any changes? Scott? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 2, 29 aye, 1 no. Senate File 74, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 74, 30 aye. Senate File 93, are there any changes? Hicks, aye to no. Murphy, no. Case, no. Rothfuss, aye to no. Landon, aye to no. Guru, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Cost, aye to no. Schuler, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 93, 21 aye, 9 no. Senate File 108, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 108, 30 aye. Senate File 109, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 109, 30 aye. Senate File 115, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 115, 30 aye. Senate File 119, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 119, 30 aye. Senate File 120, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 120, 30 aye. Senate File 130. Are there any changes? Case? Aye to no. Rothfuss? Aye to no. Wasserberger? Aye to no. Schuler? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 130, 26 aye, 4 no.
Having received the vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 2, Senate File 74, Senate File 93, Senate File 108, Senate File 109, Senate File 115, Senate File 119, Senate File 120, and Senate File 130 have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading. Senate File 80, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 80, Public Health Orders, Local and Legislative Oversight, an act relating to public health orders sponsored by Senator McEwen.
There is an amendment. Read in the amendment, please.
Senate File 80, third reading amendment number 1, page 2, line 11, after.
Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 0080 and ask for your favorable consideration. And I've put a copy of the bill with the amendment included in it on everybody's desk. If anybody didn't get one, please let me know. I'll give it to you now. Years last night. That's the first part in this amendment, if you'll look on page 2, starts about line 10. We've changed the 48-hour requirement for reporting so that the health officers can act immediately. There's not a delay of 48 hours. It does, however, put a requirement for the health officer or the person putting in the mandate, a requirement to seek public comment. And then we took out some language, cleaning it up on line 13. With the time limit specified in subsection A of this section has been deleted. May object to and has been deleted on that line. The and is not deleted on the copy I gave you. It is, however, deleted in the amendment itself. And then if we move to page 3, we've changed the time frame from 60 days or from 30 days to 60 days on line 1. And if we go to line 3, for purposes of ratifying a public health issue order issued under Wyoming Statute 35-1-204, 2 or 4, the legislature may convene via electronic means or in another place other than the seat of government. If the public health emergency necessitates meeting via electronic means or at another place, if the legislature meets via electronic means or at a place other than the seat of government, the legislative session shall be anchored at the seat of government by at least the presiding officer or acting presiding officer of each house. And once again, we changed the 30 to 60 in that paragraph in both places. Basically, what this says is we can conduct an electronic meeting. We can come down here and have a meeting. There's a requirement for the presiding officer to be present, though. Then if we go down to line 12, or excuse me, after line 7 also, public health orders ratified by the legislature shall be in effect until the date in the legislative order is set for termination. If no date is set, the order shall terminate 60 days after ratification. And sub bullet 2, the legislature terminates the order. The public health officer with approval of the governor can also terminate the order. And as we go through, basically the rest of it's kind of some cleanup. Line 4 on page 5, we've extended the county and city and district powers to 30 days. That is also present on line 7 for 30 days. Page 6, line 6, once again, 30 days. 30 days on line 7, and on line 10, 30 days. Basically, we've doubled the time frame to ensure there is enough time to identify any issues with the mandates or what's actually going on. And I think the last part is some more cleanup language. Pushing the state authority up to 60 days and 60 days on line 10 and line 13. That is basically the amendment, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go back to Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment. Mr. President, members of the Senate, as you know, as you look at this, this bill may be one of the few opportunities, or maybe the only opportunity we have to really address this issue going forward. And as you look at this, and as we deal with it, this addresses most, if not all, the concerns I had with the original bill, because it brings into effect the practicalities associated with doing this. And so it incorporates the lessons that we learned just less than a year ago of what it took to convene a special session in the midst of a pandemic and how you do that. It takes into consideration the time and the logistics it takes to put together a special session. And then deals with some of and I think outlines some of and avoids some of the constitutional minefield and traps that are out there if you don't get it done in a specific way. And there are, our founders, frankly, just didn't foresee us not meeting at the seat of government, meaning this building. But we've learned that you can change the seat of government. We changed, and the seat of government was the building a little bit east of here a few years ago. We've learned that we have the ability when it's necessary to do that, but you still have to apply the Constitution. And so this incorporates the research and the efforts that we learned and the experiences that we learned in holding a general session, or excuse me, a special legislative session during the pandemic. And so I think this bill does that. I think it strikes a pretty decent balance and has some very practical application that seems reasonable to me. It continue to work as it works its way through the process. But I think this is a great start and something that the Senate can support and be proud of as it moves through the work of this session. So I would urge your adoption and approval of this amendment. Thank you, Mr.
Further follow-up, Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the amendment, and I think this amendment brings this bill to a place where I can support it. As any legislation, I don't know it's 100% perfect, but I appreciate the bringer of the amendment and the bringer of the bill. I think it brings it to a place I can support it and brings it to a place where I think it's productive and can make this workable and make our response down the road improved. I've heard it said that we're not going to see this for 200 years. I would disagree. I think we're going to see it more. We're in a mobile society. Things fly across the world in a matter of hours, not days or months. So I think we will see more. We may see worse. But I think this amendment to this bill will make us more able to respond to these things. We may make adjustments down the road, but this makes the bill supportable, and I certainly approve the amendment and thank the bringer.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and for the amendment. Mr. President, I still don't know that I'm comfortable with the outcome here, but this amendment was good work in terms of correcting what I perceived as the largest challenges that the legislation faced. And I appreciate the effort by the sponsor to sit down and address all of the concerns that were expressed in the committee of the whole. So thank you for that. And I certainly think this moves in the right direction. I do still have a couple of questions, and one of them, I hope somebody else who's a proponent can answer, because I'd kind of like to hear it before the final speech, and we'll see if anyone else has the information about it. But that question is, it's a little bit confusing how this exactly would play out. And I'd almost like to hear a walkthrough of what this would have looked like if it had been in place before for our current pandemic. So if we could time travel back in time, and if someone would walk through this would happen, and then this would happen, and then this would happen, kind of bringing us to where we are now, and what steps would have to be taken along the way for approvals if we wanted to maintain various public health orders for an extended period of time. It's a little bit unclear to me on that. That's the first question. And again, I hope that doesn't have to come in the last speech, but I'll understand if it does. The second question that I have still gets back to the level of independent authority, where I see that the dates have been extended for counties that want to put in their county health orders. But if I have a county that, like my county, that decides to go rogue from what the rest of the state wants to do and just really wants a masking order, for example, in place, and they want it for I'm going to say arbitrarily a year. Does that have to have legislative approval at some point in the process, or can they keep extending that for 60 days at a time? Even if they're the only county that wants that. That's a little bit unclear to me still. And then the third and final question I have, the new language in the amendment, which is on line 20 of page 1, so it's inserted page 3, line 3, that I think is essential language for this amendment that says that the legislature can meet to ratify electronically or by other means. That's a really good part of this amendment. But my question is, and I don't know, do we have the authority legislatively to allow that to take place to the extent that it's not clear in the Constitution that we're allowed to do that? And I'm just sort of curious if we have the constitutional authority to call ourselves in to make what is an executive decision. We don't typically have the ability outside of an officially recognized session to take any executive action. That's the executive branch. So we rely on constitutional provisions that allow us to call ourselves in. And I'm just curious whether we're comfortable that this is constitutional, even though I want it to be. I think it's important that it be constitutional, but I'm curious whether there was any discussion on that. So those are my three, Mr. President. If there's anybody who can help out the sponsor on some of those, that would be great.
Senator Cost, and then we'll go over to the two gentlemen over here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pretty good amendment. I do feel I can support it. I have one question, and that is with regards to counties and their ability to opt out. Can they opt out immediately? If we've got a county that says it's a bunch of crap, I don't believe in it, and I just want to opt out, or is there a provision for amount of time, or should there be a provision for amount of time before they could opt out? That would be my only concern, and I'm just wondering on when they can opt out.
Chairman Scott.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm going to avoid the constitutional question that was raised. I haven't had time to look at that one. And concentrate on the amendment. Mr. President, my judgment is this makes a bad bill a little less bad, and we probably ought to pass the amendment. But it does not solve the problems. Look at on the amendment, the page 2, line 11. It says, provided a public health order issued shall become effective immediately if a delay of 48 hours will result in immediate and life-threatening physical harm. Look at how that would apply in the case of a food poisoning case or a boiled water case. You need to do it immediately. The harm from a food poisoning, I think all of us can testify, probably most of us from personal experience, is very immediate, and very insistent. But what we don't know, and the way this is written, is you have to make it immediately effective. It has to be most immediate and life-threatening. The language should be might or may instead of will, because a lot of those, the public health authorities know that you're going to get good and sick. They do not know right away whether it's going to be life-threatening or not. They know it might be, but they're likely not to know the specific organism. And the organisms do evolve and change. You get E. coli outbreak, could be deadly. Certain strains of E. coli are, but you're likely not to know whether you've got one of those strains involved or not. This amendment doesn't cure the problem in the bill as written, that you sometimes need to make one of these things effective right now. and you don't know how severe it's really going to be when you do it. You know that it's dangerous, but you don't know how much. And here, the way it's written, you've got to know it's going to be life-threatening. You don't know. So that, it helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. The 60 days to 30 days, if we have a legislative, if we pass a legislative order that terminates the public health order, then we can go to some other length of time. But if we don't, you've got the maximum is 60 days. The next one. I have a problem with that. Frankly, I think in some of the cases where you don't want to terminate the order, you want it to continue for beyond 60 days. I don't see the mechanism for getting that done. And the whole system is a mistake. But I'll get to that when I speak to the bill. Speaking of the amendment, 60 days is better than 30 days, but it doesn't solve the problem that the bill creates. So, Mr. President, I think we ought to pass the amendment and then we'll speak to the bill.
Let's just continue the discussion. Senator Wasberger, and then back to you, Senator Case.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question for the sponsor of the amendment. At least for me, in the years that I've been in Cheyenne, we've always been a little bit resistant to have special sessions. And so my question is, if we have to do this every 60 days, are we meeting in a special session every 60 days? And that would be, 6 times in a year. Would we be able to suspend the rules during the special session so that we could move legislation through? Or are we simply voting on the termination of the health order? And so I'd like to understand that part of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's go back to Senator Case and then to Senator Nethercott. Senator Case, let me note for this sponsor of the amendment to kind of be collecting your thoughts and notes as we go along here. Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm kind of hung up on the constitutionality here. Mr. President, the Constitution says that the governor can call us in, and in the times of grave emergency, he can call us in, or he or she can call us in at a place other than the seat of government. That's very clear. What's not clear is what the legislature can do. It says the legislature may convene a special session not to last longer than 20 working days as follows. And the circumstances or how the presiding officers determine that and all over. This amendment proposes to say, and as long as the presiding officers are here in these chambers, the rest of the legislators can be out and about in the world, in the virtual world. And I suppose a lot of people are thinking, well, we just did that. We had a special session that was virtual, so we just did it. Yes, we did it because the governor called us in. And that was a time of grave emergency. And so we could meet anywhere, in essence, Mr. President. Without the governor calling us in, we're limited to the seat of government. And I think it's a stretch to say, just because your presiding officers are sitting in these chairs, the legislature's at the seat of government. And so, I can see that the amendment is reaching and trying to make it better, but I don't think it really solves this constitutional question. And maybe it's not going to matter, but there is the other bigger issue, and it's more on the bill and partly on this amendment, in that the legislature is really performing an executive function. That's why if we're going to override the executive branch's health orders, they're probably not going to be very cooperative about calling us in. So we better worry about this location issue. But secondly, is that even a proper function of the legislature? So anyway, thank you, Mr. President. Hope you're having a good day, sir.
Very kind of you. Thank you. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a question for the sponsor, if it was discussed or considered, kind of worst case scenario where members of the legislature are either dead or sick and can't come. And so what is a quorum, particularly in a body of 30? We know how difficult that can be. And so is it prudent to possibly write in for 100 years from now? What happens if there's not a quorum? What then? And so just thinking about a catch-all provision that's prudent in most policies and concepts associated with laying a playbook for a crystal ball to allow for that kind of flexibility in the event that there is a more lethal pandemic that affects older folks.
Further discussion. Further discussion. We'll go back now to the sponsor, Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to try to go through all these. Hopefully I captured them all. The first, we seem to have done lots of electronic things that were questionably constitutional or not. In fact, I voted against the rules on the very first day I was down here, believing it was unconstitutional. But I think we've defined that it is. And if it is not, we've defined that everything we did in the first 8 days is unconstitutional. So that would be my answer to that question. We're not performing an executive function. If you look at Article 1, Section 38, Paragraph C of our own Constitution, or Paragraph D, it places this responsibility solely on the legislature. What happens if? What happens if the Earth gets hit by a meteor today? We're all dead anyway, so I don't think we'll be down here discussing the meteor pandemic. The 48 hours, I will tell you, I don't believe in 48 hours we will know whether it's deadly or not. So I'm not sure we aren't just getting hung up on a word. Maybe we will. And I think I've covered all the concerns. Did I forget one?
All right, are you ready for the question? Question being called on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 80. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Please.
I didn't hear the word amendment. I think you said third reading Senate File 8, but I may have.
Yeah, that's okay. I did say it. Third reading amendment. I even scripted it out for myself so I get it right.
Stand corrected.
Thank you. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 80. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Amendment has passed. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 80. We were back on the bill. Senate File 80, having received the affirmative vote. Whoa. I was just going to jump right into it. Senator Kinski and Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and for the bill. The bill doesn't do everything that I'd like to see. I'd like to see it call out the kind of scrutiny that is to be applied to anything that infringes on the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, other rights, but it is an improvement over what we've got. I would urge those, even those folks that are comfortable with what we've had in Wyoming over the course of the pandemic, I would urge them to support this for this reason. I believe that our current pandemic relief measures, our epidemic relief statute is susceptible to constitutional challenge. And I think it's important that we have something on the books in order to be able to respond to these sorts of public health crises. And where it's susceptible to challenge, at least on the basis of one Supreme Supreme Court ruling in another state is they had a law similar to ours that didn't have any kind of limitations. And their Supreme Court struck it down, and they said, and I'll quote them. I had it here a moment ago. Here it is very quickly. The state law had no specific time limitation on the authority of the executive with respect to declarations of disasters and limitations. The Chief Justice, writing for majority, said, almost certainly, no individual in the history of this state has ever been vested with such concentrated and standardless power to regulate the lives of our people, free of the inconvenience of having to act in accord with other accountable branches of government. In a 4-3 vote, the court struck down the statute as an unlawful delegation of legislative power. So, and that's where our statute is. There is no call for an involvement of the legislature. And I'm not sure how much value we'd add, but we are the legislative branch. And so this doctrine of unlawful delegation of legislative power is of long standing. And that simply says the legislature representing the people enacts laws, and then the executive is simply supposed to enforce those laws. Well, sometimes a law is passed that has so little detail, so little definition in it, that it's susceptible to challenges saying, hey, you gave too much power to the executive. You're the legislative branch. You're supposed to be involved in this. So even if you're fine with the way things have come down for the last year, I believe you should support this bill so that we have something on the books that is constitutional, that can survive a constitutional challenge, as this law in the other state, similar to ours, did not. So for that reason, Mr. President, I'm going to support this legislation. Thank you.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Senator.
President, thank you. On the bill, fair enough, and I know where the bill is headed. I think it's headed down to the other end, but I did want to just share with you, last week I came across this bill for the first time, trying to get read through all of the things we would consider during the session, and this one came up and I read it. So in the interest of full disclosure, I have a daughter who serves in this part of the world. She has advanced degrees in public health, so she kind of knows what she's talking about. So I reached out with one of these, and I said, would you take a look at Senate File 80 for me? Tell me what you think. I can't share with you all of what she thinks about this bill, but I would say that at the end of the email, she said, so let me get this right. Now, you guys are going to convene down there, and you're going to tell me about health. And I just smiled to myself and I thought, yeah, I guess that's it. We're going to get all 30 of us together. And I look around the room and I love you guys, but there's only about one senator that I would trust to tell me what the heck is going on with a public health order pandemic, a serious situation where we've got people in jeopardy for their lives and whatever. That's the piece that I'm really struggling to get over. I get I get that we got to have laws that will withstand the pressures and all that, but I think my daughter's right, Mr. President. That's the piece that I don't know what that looks like, but we get together and we go, wow, we're tired of having to wear a mask or something, and so let's just go out there and do it. We don't know health. We're not the experts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Kevin, let's just hold this a little bit, collect a few more here. Senator Scott, go ahead.
Mr. President, let's look at this bill carefully. Now, Mr. President, this is an economic development bill, all right. We passed a lot of economic development bills. But this is an economic development bill for the undertakers. And that's not one we ought to pass. The real problem I have here is that we get a much more deadly outbreak in the future. These public health orders are going to become a lot more important. And they're going to need to last longer because it takes a while. As we all know, we're very fortunate the vaccine came quickly with this one. That might not be the case in the future, Mr. President, with a much more deadly virus. We need more permanence in this. And that's a function. Our existing laws have delegated those jobs to the executive branch, which is appropriate. We pass the laws and they implement. And they have the expertise. This good senator's daughter was exactly right. We do not have the expertise to deal with some of these things. And take the most recent one. Frankly, I think our executive branch did a pretty good and pretty responsible job, especially early on, given the uncertainties that there were as to how bad this really was, how contagious it was. I think if this bill had been in effect, we would have removed some of the necessary public health orders way earlier than we should have. And we'd have killed a bunch more people. Not a tremendous percentage, but a significant number. Get a much more deadly outbreak, you could kill a lot. And this one was, as pandemics go, this one was not that deadly. Unless, of course, you were my age. And I had a particular perspective because my doctor told me whatever I did, I was not to be exposed to this thing. And that was true for many people my age. It's where many of the fatalities were. And I think what we're seeing with this bill, I think the governor, the state health officer did the right things. They restricted some things that people want to do. They restricted people's economic activity. People didn't like that. Of course they did. But you get after the government for putting those restrictions on. Basically, the restrictions were made necessary by the virus. Nobody. And we're just indulging in the human tendency, which has been common over the years, to shoot the bringer of bad news, to shoot the messenger, because we didn't like the restrictions, but the restrictions, Mr. President, were necessary, and in the future could be a lot more necessary. And I think the comment earlier, what we're doing is invading the executive branch function is accurate. This is not something the legislature ought to be doing. I don't know the specifics of some court decisions from some other state. I suspect they just got it wrong, but I frankly don't know about that. This bill is dangerous, and I would hope we would defeat it.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. President, I want to touch on a couple of points that have been thrown out here. One, let's just exchange the word. We've all been told out here that we lack the expertise to deal with health workers. So just change that. I'll use the same example. Banking. How many bankers are out here? Do we have the expertise to come down here and write banking laws that govern the exchange and the commerce and banking? How many of us are experts in cryptocurrency and blockchain? But we write laws on those. Transportation, how many of you? So just to insert a word, we come down here every year and we write laws that the majority of this body is not the experts in, but we rely on experts, we take public testimony, we go through that process. That's how we end up legislating. Because we don't have the expertise on almost anything as a body. We may have a couple expertise in one area or another area. We do that every day, folks. That's what we come down here every year and do. So just insert a different word into health, because that's the argument is we can't do anything here because we lack the expertise. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, the other thing I'd like to address is the fact that throwing out the good in the pursuit of the perfect. You know, I've only been here a couple of terms, but I have learned in the 11 years that I've been here, Mr. President, at least 20 to 25% of the bills that we see every year are fixing something that was unforeseen the year before, or circumstances change on the ground. We change stuff that we just did last year. I'll bet I can go through the 600 bills that we've had filed this year, and I can pull 20 or 30 of those out of there that are something that we passed in the last 2 years that we're going back and correcting. That's part of the legislative process. So the whole idea that we're going to pursue the perfect right now with the single stroke of legislation to solve all the problems associated with this, it's just not realistic. Don't throw the good out for the sake of the perfect. Because as a legislative body, we make sausage, folks, and very rarely is it perfect.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, as I heard the discussion on this bill from the very beginning, I've grown very disgusted in what has happened. Because if we look at the bill and what the heart of the bill was, it's 351-240A, and then Romanet 2 and 4 or 4. And when I look at the rules, or when I look at the statutes, there are 24 Romanets here. And all of this discussion I've heard is about all the other Romanets and not the ones in the bill. That's where the problem is here on the floor. We're talking about all these other scary monsters that aren't in this bill. How did we get to this point without looking at this text? So if we look at that Romanet 2 is to investigate and control the cause of epidemic, communicable, occupational, other diseases, infections. That's in 2 right there. And then the other one is to close theaters, schools, or other public places, which is probably the most important part of this bill. All of the other things that we're talking about. And then when you flip the page, if you go to your green book, there's all kinds of things in here that fall under, you know, the food that we kept mentioning, the floods. All the other scary things we're talking about are in these other Romanets. This bill is very focused on the things that happen when we shut down public places. So I would just ask that the body look at those Romanets and stay focused on the bill and not on all these other scary things that are in the other Romanets that we're not even discussing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. President. With all due respect, I have to differ with a good friend of mine from the southern part of the state. We do make lots of bills connected to lots of different things, but I don't think banking has lives included in it. I don't think that some of the other bills we've made are connected to lives and the outcome of that. So I think we have to be careful there to not do something that puts us in a position. Along with that, my concern is I feel like we're reacting to the past that we have data on, but we're looking to the future to set for something we have no clue what it's going to be. I think we have to be careful to jump to conclusions that what we have in the bill will adequately take care of our people when and if something worse comes is really stepping out on a limb, especially when counties can just opt out. Okay, we're renegade, we're going to do what we darn well please, so we're not going to listen to it. We'll just continue where we want to go. I think it's important for us to think about those things as we move forward and ask ourselves, do we want to do that? Or do we want to try to come up with something maybe that's got a little more of a restriction on it? I'm not saying that we should not change what's out there, but we could certainly take a look at it after a year when the action of this particular pandemic has maybe subsided. Right now, there's two strains of this, the England strain and the Brazilian strain that are starting to come into the United States, and nobody knows exactly what that is going to do or what it could do to us. Yeah, it might not do any more than what the last one did, but it might too. So I'm just saying we need to think about what the implications and the unintended circumstances are. And yes, it does cover what the bill is talking about, because the bill is talking about the life of the citizens in our state, and that's important. Thank you.
Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the bill, but I really appreciate the improvements. I do, and I appreciate the intent, certainly, that we try and provide a better system and process, knowing that there were some concerns. Certainly, there were some challenges over the last year, and things obviously did not go by any stretch of the imagination perfectly. But they went. And honestly, upon reflection, I don't know how they could have gone much better without the benefit of hindsight that we have now. It's always easy to look back and say, all right, well, we could have done this, we could have done that. But we didn't have all the information we have now, Mr. President, and a lot of decisions had to be made with limited information. So when we contemplate it from that circumstance of not hindsight, but trying to work from an unknown foresight, I don't know that this improves upon our current system, and I do have some of the concerns that have been raised. I have significant concerns about the constitutionality of the Wyoming legislature making decisions outside of session. We are only empowered during session. Even if it says we have certain responsibilities under the Constitution, which unquestionably we do, we only have the power to act on those responsibilities while we are embodied as the legislature. And we don't have the power through legislative statute to call ourselves into session or to make inquiries or really to do much of anything else as a part of the separation of powers. That's what means it's an executive power. We only get to write laws. We don't implement them. We don't interpret them. We write them. We try and do our best. But we're not a governing body from the standpoint of executive authority, where we get to make implementation proclamations or decisions on the fly. So when we reflect on the idea of do we have the expertise, well, we make laws about everything. We're slow and methodical when we're at our best. We think about things for a long time. We consult experts. We bring in a diversity of opinions. We get public comment. And then we write a law where we hopefully don't micromanage outcomes. We write laws on medical provision, on healthcare. We write laws that govern doctors in the state of Wyoming. But we don't practice surgery, and we shouldn't. We typically know what level we're supposed to perform at, and that's the governance and law level. The idea that we would have special expertise to make appropriate decision in times of crisis, you know, I love this body too, but I think that's giving us a little bit too much credit. We don't have it, and we should recognize we don't have it. Each of us in here has individual expertise and strengths in specific areas that makes us valuable assets to this community. But at the end of the day, the idea that we're better at judging what to do in a pandemic than epidemiologists and healthcare providers and experts, to me, that's a bit of a stretch. So I see it both as a constitutional challenge for us to even assemble, but if we could overcome that hurdle, I still wouldn't want us to, because I don't think we've got the authority. But Mr. President, even with the existing statutes in place, we do have, and we are empowered with, the ability to come together if we as the legislature choose to assemble into a special session. It's in the Constitution. It is regrettable we have to do it here, but nothing we can do in statute changes that obligation. We probably need at some point to consider a constitutional amendment, a little tweak that allows us the same language where when we're called in by the governor, we can call ourselves in with that same language. We can't achieve that through statute. That's why it was done constitutionally for emergency circumstances. When the governor calls us to convene, we should probably contemplate that in the future so that we have the right to convene ourselves under duress in locations that are outside the seat. Again, that can't be accomplished by this bill. And Mr. Chairman, the last concern I have is really at the end of the day, I still don't know that I understand it. I've asked a few times for a how would this really work approach, and I don't know. And each of those concerns, Mr. President, has me believing that the current system positions us better in a time of crisis than we would be positioned with the passage of this legislation.
Thank you. Further discussion back to Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I oppose this bill because I think the main issue with me is that we're in the middle of the pandemic, actually, and there's a better solution. Your Corporations Committee in the interim produced a bill. It's Senate File 30, Pandemic Response Review Task Force. It's been referred to corporations. It's reported out. It's on the general file. It's a proposal that we look back, analyze what happened, gather these experts.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe it's appropriate to reference other legislation when discussing a bill.
I believe you're correct. We're at
Mr.
that-
President, I push back a little bit.
Please do.
The only pushback would be, this isn't our only tool. We have other tools to look at, one that we haven't looked at yet, and that we should look at first. That being said, take a look at that bill. Mr. President, there's other legislation regarding how the overturn of health orders occurs. And some of the legislation doesn't involve the legislature, Mr. Chairman. That's the rub. The legislature doesn't have an executive function. So bringing them back into special session is first awkward. Secondly, it violates separation of powers. And it's not giving us any new power. We can call ourselves into special session. I totally agree that we need to fix that part of the Constitution with respect to how and where that occurs, Mr. President, but it is in the Constitution now. A better approach is to have each of the entities review their own health orders. I would like to see an affirmative requirement that the governor of Wyoming affirm health orders, affirm the actions of the state health officer after a certain time period. With that, Mr. President, I oppose this bill. Thank you.
Let's go first to Senator Steinmetz and then to you, Senator Wasserberger.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've had a great debate on this bill, and I think arguments for the separation of powers could be made both directions. But what I really like about this bill is the fact that we're not approaching it with a one-size-fits-all approach. So I don't know how the pandemic unfolded in your counties, but I do know how things happened in mine. And I was on the side of the state which was less affected than some other areas in our rural communities. We don't have big cities, and we don't have some of the spread that other places had. And so I really appreciate the fact that our local community can make decisions for themselves. And let me tell you how things unfolded in my community. We had every day for a while, we had a community emergency management call that we were all on. Me, the public health officer, our county commissioners, and then we spread it out a little longer so that it wasn't every day, and then it was once a week, and then it was once a month. And so we came together as a community to address this problem and to really work it out. not just elected officials, but our public health officials, our emergency management coordinator, our city councilman, everyone came together, and we love our communities. We want the best for them. We don't want to see anyone die, to the good tall senator who is concerned about that. And so this tool really provides us with some local control in issues that affect our communities in different ways across the state. And so for that reason and many others, I'm on and in favor of this bill, and I hope you will be too. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Wassenberg.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Reluctantly on and against the bill, I do admire how the sponsor has amended it and made it better. But I'm worried about whether or not the bill is actually constitutional and the way we're calling ourselves back together. But the thing that worries me the most about the bill is one of the things that I've been incredibly proud of in the years that I've been in the legislature is that we are a citizen legislature. And when the session is over, we go home to our people and we walk and work and live with our people throughout our community. And I've always resisted the idea of, or maybe I've hated the idea of special sessions. And I really don't enjoy them all that much, but I'm willing to do them when they're called. And it appears to me that we might be moving more towards a full-time legislature with this bill. And so I would state on and against the bill, but I would like to state that everybody on this floor knows that my family is heavily involved in the medical profession. And the hospital where my wife works was dangerously close to being overwhelmed. And then the hospital where my daughter works here in this community was dangerously close to being overwhelmed. And the governor actually called in additional nursing staff to both of those hospitals. And if we had the opportunity to come down here and change the health orders, I strongly believe that what the good senator from Natrona County said would have been true, that the deaths in the state of Wyoming would have increased simply because those particular hospitals that I'm talking about were almost overwhelmed. And that's how close it was in Wyoming. And so on and against the bill, unfortunately, I think it's a much better bill than what I originally saw. But for those reasons, I'm opposed. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go back to Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. President, on and for the bill. And ladies and gentlemen, the Senate, this isn't the last we're going to see of this issue. We're going to look and we're going to look at this. We'll, what's already been said, we'll be back doing this again. We'll continue to examine our response and what we did to this pandemic as it went forward. But I think we'll recognize that certain parts of the state were affected drastically differently than other parts of the state were affected. And quite frankly, I'm incredibly complimentary of our governor and most of our local public health officials about how they did that. Oftentimes, as people would, as our constituents would call and talk to me, and they'd say, "Well, we've closed down," and you'd have to remind them that really there were closures of five types of businesses were closed. We had, of course, essential, non-essential, but many of the closures that happened were simply matters of corporate policy. We have Wyoming, for good or for ill, in my opinion, mostly for ill, has been. We've had most of our local stores and in many instances replaced by national chains. And so you had someone outside of Wyoming deciding whether or not they're going to close down the appliance store or some other store or what restrictions went in. Most of those, and quite frankly, a lot of those things that a lot of our constituents think this bill may help solve are not going to be solved because so many of that happened because of private property rights and the ability of individuals control what happens on their own property. And this bill is not going to change that. But just to gently push back on some of the concepts, and do healthcare professionals know more about healthcare than we do? Oh, I don't, that's almost a rhetorical question. because we know the answer to that. But, you know, and maybe it's but I think also as you look at that and what happens, because what we do when we come down here and what I would hope we would focus on as we come down here and we would look at if this bill were to pass at public policy orders. First of all, we don't have to call ourselves into special session. If you look at how the Constitution works, it goes out and there's a poll. And if most of us think that it's unneeded or unnecessary, you don't have to call a special session. You go back to look at Article 3, Section 7, which is where this constitutionality originates. It's interesting. You have the legislature shall meet at the seat of government on certain days in certain situations is what the first place says. And then it's really interesting. And this is what no one really quite understands the answer to. It hasn't ever been challenged or litigated very much, but the governor may also, what does that mean when he says also, call a special session? So he may call a special session. Does that also refer, because it's also in addition to the general sessions, but he doesn't call the general sessions. He can call that. And so it talks about in place of emergency. And then right after that, it talks about the legislature may convene special sessions. And so the governor may do that. Does that also refer to the ability of the legislature then to convene in times of emergency or special, a grave emergency by law defined? And so many of those things are unsettled. How does that settle? I don't know. But what I do know is that when we pass a law, it has a presumption of constitutionality. Because we also, as we've talked about many times in this body and several times this year already, ultimately we decide by our votes whether or not we think a bill is constitutional or not. That's one of the reasons you vote no. You can certainly vote no on a bill. You don't think it's constitutional. But we do have a presumption of constitutionality. And what this bill does, because when it talks about in times of war, another law defined temporarily convene the legislature in a place or places other than the seat of government. And then it says the legislature may convene a special session to last longer, not longer than 20 days, as follows: upon a written request of the presiding officer of each house of the legislature by a majority of elected members, the legislature shall convene a special session, or the presiding officers of each house shall also jointly call a special session for the purpose of resolving a challenge or dispute of any kind in the determination of president's elector. So we're not talking about that. So we're just talking about the first one. And so when we look at that, does that, I think it's a very strong argument that when we do that with those issues of danger, of grave emergency or times of war also apply to us and our ability as well. And so, but ultimately we get to decide that and our votes reflect that. Why is it important to talk about the Constitution? Because what we also know, and one other point I would make.
About 30 seconds here, Senator.
If I can, I'd like to use some of my other 5 minutes and then I won't speak again.
Please do.
Mr. President, thank you. And so we also have a long tradition in this country of having civilian control over our military. Who knows more about military operations and covert operations and world peace and how to wage war than the military? But yet we impose civilian control in the form of both the commander in chief, the president, and also Congress, certain abilities to wage war, declare war, to fund the war. Those things are controlled by the military. So we recognize in our form of Republican government, we recognize that we're not the authorities, but yet we can. Why do we do that? Because it's a very powerful thing. And it's important our military be under that civilian control. Do we abrogate the ability and responsibility of the legislature, as already been pointed out in Article 7, Section 20 of our duty to provide for the health of our state? I think the answer is no. Why? But when we come down here, it's not to second guess the medical experts. It's to balance policy considerations. Because what happened? What have we seen in this, not just in our state, but across the state? And again, our governor was great. I don't think there may have been 1 or 2 states that were less restrictive than the state of Wyoming, the entire country. And our governor did a great job. But in some cases, our governor's hands were tied because of the authority currently granted to the public health officers. Some of our county commissioners, our hands were tied because of authority granted to public health officers. Now that may be a good thing, that may be a bad thing, but the other side of it is when we come down here, what will we talk about? Yeah, we'll talk about orders, but why are we going to talk about those? Because we're going to balance policy considerations on things that we saw happen. The right to peaceably assemble, freedom of religion was impacted. We certainly infringements upon private property rights and private property interests in significant ways were affected, not in our state and throughout our country. We saw that. We saw interstate commerce affected. We saw all kinds of both national and or the US constitutional and state constitutional rights that are protected affected. We recognize that sometimes under certain circumstances, the government does have the right to infringe upon those when for limited times and in critical interests. But that's what we do down here, and that's what we would reconvene to do. And those are the policy considerations that we would advance. And some of those, fortunately, we had some restriction and some restraint doing that, but in large part, that's what we would do. And that's why this bill should move forward. It's not perfect. And I will be visiting this again. We'll be moving this as it goes along, but I think this helps guard against. I'm not worried about this governor. I'm worried about the next governor or the governor after that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question.
McEwen,
I'd like to make a few comments to close this out, sir.
please do. You caught the attention of the body today.
First of all, we are a citizen legislature. We're not a legislature of experts. There is no requirement to have 4 doctors in here, 3 plumbers, 2 mechanics, and a guy who sells soup for a living. It could be anybody. The state constitution squarely puts this responsibility on us. And I understand everybody's concerned about health and what's happening. What we haven't hit upon is some of the other effects. As we went about our daily lives during this, we watched small businesses close down while Walmart, while big stores, big box stores reported record earnings. And because they sold soda pop and bread, they could sell you a shovel. But if all you sold was shovels, you were closed down. At some point in time, there needed to be some common sense applied to this. We watched wrestling matches with no masks on. And if you've ever watched 2 children wrestle or ever done it, you're slobbering and bleeding all over everybody. And then when the wrestling match is over, we can't shake hands. And we have no recourse as a legislature to fix some of that. I'm not saying we're smarter than health officers. But what I am saying is we're responsible for their decisions. We gave them the authority to make the decisions, but we can't delegate the responsibility of the outcome of that. And there's a couple things I learned in the Army. A bad plan executed well is better than a good plan poorly executed. We've done nothing to forward this or fix anything that we've been through. And I'll leave you with one last thought. Perfection is truly the enemy of good enough. So I would ask for your favorable consideration on this bill so we can at least get something started like everything else I think I've seen down here in my extensive experience. It's a work in progress. But if we don't start it, we'll go back to what we did and history will repeat itself. We will have not learned from our mistakes. And the last point I want to make, this bill does not preclude any other legislation. As I go through the bill, nowhere in it does it say we can't look at other options and means. It's just one part of one thing. And on that note, I would ask for your favorable vote.
Ready for the question? The question being called. Senate File 80. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 80, roll call. Anderson. No. Baldwin. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Driscoll. I. Ellis. I. French. I. Murphy. No. Guru. No. Hicks. I. Hutchings. I. James. I. Kinsky. I. Cole. I. Cost. No. Landon. No. McEwen. I. Nethercott. I. Pappas. I. Perkins. I. Rothbus. No. Salazar. I. Schuler. I. Scott. No. Steinmetz. I. Wasserberger. No. President Dockstader. Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 80, 21 aye, 9 no.
Senate File 80, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 80 has passed the Senate. Let's go back now. For the record, we didn't lay back. We're just removing it from the consent list. Senate File 155, and you should have the third reading amendment out now in front of you. So Senate File 155, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 155, limiting firearm seizure and regulation during emergencies, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, an act relating to Homeland Security.
There is an amendment, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 155 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good senators, this is a cleanup amendment based on the same concept we've already discussed for this bill, which exempts government entities. The previous amendment, as the good senator from Natrona County behind me pointed out, probably left one provision of that bill untouched, and so this amendment cleans that up. So I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Questions or discussion on the amendment? Questions or discussions? Are you ready for the question? Senate third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 155. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. We are back on the bill. You ready for the question? Senate File 155, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Senate File 155 roll call. Anderson. Aye. Baldwin. Aye. Beitman. Aye. Boner. Aye. Bouchard. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Driscoll. Aye. Ellis. Aye. French. Aye. Murphy. Aye. Guru. No. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. James. Aye. Kinsky. Aye. Cole. Aye. Cost. Aye. Landon. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Perkins. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. Wasserberger. Aye. President Dockstader. Aye. Case. No to aye. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 155, 28 aye, 2 no.
Senate File 155, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 155 has passed the Senate. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, just before you speak, we have had the amendments distributed to the boxes in the back with the hard copies. Now that you know that, what would you like us to do?
President, I move to stand recess until 2 p.m. 1:30 p.m. Excuse me, 1:30.
Okay. Announcements.
Mr. President,
Oh, please do.
we will go into caucus upon recess in what? Republican caucus in room 110 upon adjournment. As soon as we're done.
Room 10.
Afternoon recess.
Okay.
Yeah, right after we get out.
Now announcements. Let's go to you, Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your free and fair Democratic caucus will caucus in the lunchroom while you all are downstairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Further announcements? I have one to note. The Senate Rules Committee will meet Thursday, March 11th at 12 noon in room 110, W110. Any further announcements? Any further announcements? You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Stand adjourned or stand at recessed until 1:30? 1:30. All those in favor